Right. So I'm happy you got the email from the Shorely folks. They have been amazing, which I understand is not just an Adam thing, but that's like everyone they interact has very positive things to say about them.
I
How
like to.
long? Yeah, how long have you been going to the Shore Leave shows?
This will be my 21st year.
Wow.
Yep.
And have you been doing panels at all those as a author,
Yeah.
or were you
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. I was an author guest at my first shore leave in 2004. Uh, I was there for the launch of my first ever direct to paperback Star Trek novel. I had done some work in ebooks before that that had been published, but nothing that had come out in print.
Hmm.
So it just happened to be a good quirk of timing that early copies of my first paperback, A Time to Kill, were released in time to be showcased at Shore Leave in 2004. So, and I'd already written for the show at that point. I'd written for Deep Space Nine. I'd made Sales to Voyager. I'd done work for the Star Trek comic books. I'd written for Star Trek games. I wasn't a newcomer to Trek by that point, but I was still relatively early in my prose writing career in terms of prose fiction. But Shore Leave treated me, like a rock star, like they would treat any other valued author guest right from the very beginning. And I just came to fall in love with that con. It's my favorite con.
And how many conventions are you doing every year?
Not as many as I used to. Before COVID, I might do anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen in a year. Now I do, if I'm lucky, two or three.
Is
Uh,
that going to be your pace going forward? Or are you looking to get back to going to all those?
I guess it would depend on whether the conventions want to invite me back. Part of it is that after COVID, I sort of realized that I didn't miss the convention circuit as much as I thought I would. I
Hmm.
still love Shore Leave. Part of what I love about Shore Leave is because it has a particular focus on Star Trek authors as guests. This is where I and a lot of my fellow Trek authors, we sort of have a little family, a brotherhood or a sisterhood or whatever you want to call it, a community that we've built of friends, and that's where I go to see my friends every year. And then other cons, I mean, I used to go, for instance, to New York Comic Con because I live in New York City and it was my local con. But over the years, I was there from the very beginning when they didn't charge professionals for attendance. And then they started charging a nominal fee. And then every year it's gone up to the point where they're charging exorbitant fees to professionals just to be there, even though we're the ones who help add value to their show. And at some point, I realized if I didn't have a book on new release at exactly that moment, that my publishers were not going to feature me. It wasn't going to be worth the expense of paying to be there. Year after year, the experience showed me that any contacts I made there, I could just as easily have made online, or I could just as easily have approached through my agent, that there was no real upside to being there in person. So I stopped going to New York Comic Con just because I didn't want the exposure to COVID in sort of a mass situation. Same reason I stopped going to San Diego. Again, very expensive, and for me, hideously expensive because I have to fly cross country,
Hmm.
get a hotel. There's meal expenses. I mean, 4 or 5 days, 6 days in San Diego for San Diego Comic Con, you can burn through 2, 3 grand easy. I mean, that's low end. So
Hmm.
it's very easy to burn through a very substantial amount of money out there. And again, I found out it wasn't worth it. The only reason I went to Comic Con International in 2022 is that that was the year the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers named me as a Grand Master and gave me its Faust Award, uh, lifetime achievement in media tie-in writing. And since that's only going to happen to me once in my life, it's not like you're going to win the Faust Award twice. You're not going to get named Grand Master by the same organization twice. I'm like, this is a once in a lifetime event. For this, I will make an exception. I will go to San Diego. I had a friend offer to share a hotel room with me. I made it a short visit. I came in a little bit ahead of the con, stayed just long enough to pick up the award, do a couple of panels, and then bounced out before the weekend. Um, but I used to do, like I said, a whole bunch of cons. I used to do Gen Con. I used to try and get up and sort of explore other cons. Like I got up to Con Fusion in Detroit.
Hmm.
Been to Dragon Con a few times. But again, in each case, it came down to the fact that for a lot of these cons, I was expected to pick up the cost and eat the cost myself, pay my own travel, pay my own room, cover all my own expenses. And after a certain point, I said to myself, well, why am I doing this? Do I Can I show that I sold enough books as a result of being there to justify this level of expense when my
Hmm.
rate of return per unit on a book is so low? And I did the math and I said, from a cost benefit return on investment perspective, I can't justify the cost of being at these cons if I have to pay out of pocket to do it. So I've recently, because of COVID, when I had to go into seclusion anyway, I set up a new standard, which is, with the exception of shore leave, which has always comped me a room and has offered me other considerations. For a new con to get on my schedule, certain requirements have to be made. If I'm going to need to travel by air or by train to get there, they need to cover that expense. If I'm going to be there for, an overnight, they've got to cover my hotel expenses. I expect a meal per diem, and I might even ask an appearance fee. I don't think that these are unreasonable requests for my time, since that means that's a weekend I will spend working to add value to their event instead of a weekend I will spend at home working on my stuff. So if they want me to spend my weekend working for them, I expect compensation. Any
Right.
con that isn't going to offer me that compensation, I'm not going to go. There's a reason I don't go to Dragon Con. I've applied to Dragon Con as a guest many times, and I've been told at least 3 times over the years that they didn't think I was important enough to merit them providing me any consideration whatsoever. They weren't willing to comp a room. They
Oof.
weren't willing to help with transportation costs. They weren't even willing to help me arrange a room that I would pay for. They weren't
Right.
willing to offer me any consideration whatsoever. And finally, I said, all right, for whatever reason, they've decided I'm not worth it. Okay, well, if I'm not worth it, neither are you.
Right.
So I don't go to Dragon Con.
Yeah, I have not been to many conventions. I've not been to any outside of the state that I live in. Where I'm in Florida. I'm in the capital of Florida. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been to MegaCon, Tampa Bay Comic Convention, or Tampa Bay Comic Con. We've got some like really small ones here that range from like a dozen dealers in a room to
Mm-hmm.
our larger one that takes up the entire civic center. Uh, so it's interesting to see how the behind the scenes works for all these shows, because you can pretty much ask anyone that's working these conventions, like, hey, how does the staff treating you, how's your show going,
Oh, sure.
how's the traffic, and it's a huge variance among all of them, and it really comes down to like what's the focus of the show.
Yeah.
And I think Shore Leave has been able to like maintain that focus as like we're media authors first and foremost, and then like we also have some of these other media guests, like the actors, but that they'll bring the people in, but we still want to focus on the authors.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about Shore Leave in particular. Although they do have the actor guests, and we understand that the actors are why most of the fans are going to be there.
Hmm.
That's what sells tickets. People want to see the stars. We get it. But Shore Leave, more than just about any other con I know of in America, has a special focus for media tie-in authors, for those of us who work not just for Star Trek but for Star Wars, for any other licensed brand, from thrillers like 24, westerns, science fiction, Stargate, fantasy books. They're pretty broad, in that respect, and that they welcome a wide range of authors. But the First Love, because it's a Star Trek fan club based fan convention, at least that was its roots, its origin, it has a special affinity with the Star Trek publishing program and with Star Trek authors. And it holds a special place in the heart of many Star Trek authors. It's important to a lot of us.
Yeah.
And so we,
And
a lot of us will block out that weekend and say, short of a guest of honor appearance somewhere else or a major family event or we
mhm.
die, we're going to be there that weekend.
Right. Yeah, the unfortunate thing this year is that they had to move the date, which kind of
Mhm.
threw a wrench in that, blocking out the time
Well, there
because
was
they
nothing they
lost
could do.
their
They
yeah.
lost the previous hotel, the Delta Inn, Valley in Hunt Valley, Maryland. That had been the con's home as far as I for about 40 years. That's the very
Mhm.
beginning. And it was a very strange hotel, but we loved it, for what it was, its flaws and all.
Personality.
Personality.
Yeah.
It was a much bigger con hotel than had any right to exist in that place. Why that sprawl of a hotel would be there of all places, who knows? But it was, and we loved it. And then somebody figured out uh, the land that it sits on is worth more than the building
Mhm.
itself. They realized they could make more money demolishing the building and just bulldozing it over and burying it and then just reselling the lot for something else than they would ever make by refurbishing the hotel. There was never going to be enough profit in the hotel. And finally, at long last, they told us, well, the doors are shuttered. It went through many sales. It got sold and passed ownership several times over the last decade or so. And each time we were worried, oh, is it going to get shut down? Is it going to be the same? Are they not going to renew the contract? And somehow each time the con committee, would pull a rabbit out of a hat and would figure it out. But this time there was no hat to pull a rabbit out of. The hat was buried along with the hotel.
Yeah, the
Uh,
real estate market really buried it.
and there was just nothing
So
done. So yeah, but they found this place in Lancaster, Maryland, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Wyndham Lancaster Convention Center Hotel. Uh, Never been there, never seen it in person. I hope it's nice. We shall see.
yeah, and as my first show, I'm, the first time goer to these shows, but I'm not going to be the only one that's stepping foot into the place for the first time. Like everyone's going to be in that boat,
Yeah, it's
which
going
is
to be a,
great.
a whole new experience, but I'm excited
Yeah.
about that. I mean, I miss a lot about the old place. I miss Hunt Valley. I miss that area. There was a place called Andy Nelson's that had a great barbecue. That was sort of our Saturday night tradition. I'm going to miss that. But you know
Hmm.
what? We have Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is, from all accounts, a beautiful town in Pennsylvania, with lots of great restaurants and dining options in its downtown area. It's vibrant, it's exciting, it's new, it's different, it's something to explore. And so I and several of my author friends and my wife, we have made specific plans to make sure we get out of the hotel at least a couple of times. And we're going to explore Lancaster. We're going to go see what there is. We're going to try some of its best restaurants. My wife is excited because the Lancaster area is known for being part of Amish country, for quilting fabrics, for antiquing, which are both interests of hers. So she's really excited to go and sort of, haunt the Amish fabric markets and look for quilting fabrics because that's one of her hobbies. And she just wants to look at antiques because she always wants to look at antiques, even though we have no place to put any if she brought one home. But she loves to look at them all the same. So she's excited for once in a way that she wasn't excited by the Hunt Valley area. So Lancaster is exciting for her, and it's just exciting to me because it's something new. I'm looking forward to it.
Right. So you mentioned the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers a couple times there.
Yeah.
Um, big news in that particular avenue of stuff is that you were just nominated for one of your stories for the Scribe Awards, two of your stories. So yeah,
Firewall.
yeah, you've
Yeah,
already
Firewall was
outnumbered
nominated
everyone
as best
else.
original novel speculative,
Hmm.
which is the most hotly contested category of Scribe Award. And then the short story category, which is relatively new, I think that was instituted over the last few years. In the short fiction category, I have a Star Trek DS9 story that was published as part of Star Trek Explorer magazine, issue number 8. The story is called Lost and Founder, and it's basically a story about Odo. It's set in the far future, like 2,000 years after Trek, and he's still alive. Founder's still sort of kicking around alone on this desolate planet, and he's using his shapeshifted abilities to, out of his imagination and memories, creates simulacrums of his old DS9 friends who he terribly misses. And he's talking to them, and he knows that on some level he's actually talking to himself. He's talking to his own subconscious, but it's basically him working out and working through the despair of being the last man standing.
Mhm.
And sort of it shows, like, how advanced his abilities as a shapeshifter might be after, say, 2,000 years.
Right. Now, are those awards done by category, or is there just like one winner out of all of them?
Well, no, they're done by category. There are various categories of Scribe Award. There's Best Original Novel General, which is for a novel with an original story based on some licensed property that isn't science fiction or fantasy. That tends to be things like TV series like 24, thrillers, medical thrillers. There used to be like a whole line of diagnosis murder, medical mystery books. Um, and actually, the first Scribe Award I ever won back in 2016 was in the category Best Original Novel General for my 24 novel, Rogue, which was a story of Jack Bauer during his time in exile, taking on like a group of Somali pirates that turned out to be connected to a nuclear plot, and yada, yada, yada. And
Right.
a lot of fun, a lot of fun having him, bouncing around Somalia and Kenya and whatever, and getting into all kinds of trouble. And that got me my first scribe. And then there's best novel, which is for science fiction, fantasy, things like Dungeons and Dragons, Star Trek, Star Wars, X-Men, basically anything that would fall within the speculative fiction, genre. Beyond that, there is best adapted novel, and I think that is for basically if you're writing a novel that's adapting a story from another medium like graphic novels, TV, film. And I don't think they divide that one up by genre. I think that's just a general catch-all category, best adapted. Then they have recently instituted new categories: best original graphic novel, best short fiction, best original audio drama, which this year is completely dominated by Doctor Who. All five slots, all five entries are Doctor Who, mostly because they are the only ones consistently producing high level audio drama right now. So within each of these categories, there will be one winner. And that's determined by the judges who nominated the works and then also at the same time voted on them. So although they've released the nominations, they already know who won. By the time those nominations are published, the judges have already told the committee, these are our five nominees, this is our winner, yada, yada, yada. So they hold that. That'll be announced during Shore Leave weekend. They're going to be doing the announcement and presentation of the awards at Comic-Con International in San Diego, I believe I think it's Friday afternoon. Could be Friday. I believe it's Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. Pacific, on July 26th. So around 5 o'clock on Friday or so, we should be getting word of who won in which categories, and I'll find out whether I won in short fiction, which maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I have no idea. A lot of great writers, a lot of great stories, and then obviously I'll find out near the end whether Firewall or something else won for best original speculative, best novel. That one I'm up against a lot of tough competition. There's a good Star Wars novel in the mix, and there's also the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko by Derek Tyler
Yes.
Monaco.
I actually
Uh,
just spoke with him 2 days ago,
mhm.
and he was talking about your interactions about that on Twitter, and he was just repeatedly saying that he was just happy to be nominated. Like that's the win, right?
I think he's
Is
got a
getting the
very good chance.
nomination,
I think he has a strong chance of winning the category.
right?
I mean, I would like to win it, but I have to say, if I'm going to lose to anybody, I would be pleased as punch to lose to Derek. If
Right.
anybody else deserves it, I think Derek does.
Yeah, I've read the Firewall novel. It was fantastic.
Okay, very kind.
It felt like you got the everyone's tone correctly, which
Thank
it
you.
can be hard to do, especially with characters that are like in transit from personality changes from like Seven going from her TV personality to like what we eventually got in Picard,
Mhm.
and it worked well. Um, But as you said, the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko is also a fantastic novel, and
Oh yeah,
I'm
and it's
just
a
happy that
juggernaut with a beloved character, just like Seven's a beloved character, but so is Cisco,
yeah,
and Cisco
yeah,
is a series lead.
yeah, it
So,
was a solid year this year. And what was the Star Wars novel that was nominated?
oh, Eye of Darkness, I think.
Was that John
Eye of Darkness
Jackson?
by George Mann.
Okay, yeah, I haven't read that one.
I think it was.
But
I
yeah,
could be
there's
wrong, but I think it was Eye of Darkness.
yeah. Normally, I've read probably about like a third of the books when they release like the list. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I got like more
Mm.
reading to do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and I've been very pleased at the feedback I've gotten on Firewall, especially from uh, gay readers, trans readers, gay women. These are really the people for whom I wrote the book. In whose interest I really put this thing out there. And so to have so many of them reach out to me either through Facebook messages or emails through my website to tell me, how much the book means to them, how much it feels true to their lived experience, has meant a great deal to me. It's been very moving to find that the book has struck a very powerful chord, it seems, with this segment of the audience.
right, and you guys hit the audience that you were hoping to hit too. So
Exactly. It was their
yeah.
approval. It was their story that I wanted to do justice to, and so to have them have so many of them reach out to me to say that it worked for them has been very gratifying.
So you mentioned your website, and I wanted to tell you that a few years ago, I noticed like how much work you were doing on your own personal site, and I noticed like the response I was getting to it, and that actually was the genesis of like this actual project that I'm doing now with the
Really?
interviews and going to shore leave and all that, because I was like, I'm the only guy out here that like cares this much about Star Trek books, right? Turns out that's not true even in the least bit. Like yeah, I'm like the middle school kid that does well in middle school, then goes to high school and does very well there, and then goes to college and finds out that like, oh, like there's a whole lot of talented people out there, and they're all interested in the same stuff that I am. So,
Yep.
uh, but it's you're constantly posting stuff on your website. You're constantly on social media. What kind of responses and which of those tools is actually your favorite one to use to reach the people that you're wanting to reach?
I don't actually post stuff to my website all that. I used to a lot more frequently than I do now. I rarely post anything to it as I use things like X or Blue Sky or Facebook to disseminate information about things like convention appearances and new book releases. The
Hmm.
primary information that goes on my official website, davidmack.pro, is information like when I'm finally allowed by my publisher to announce a new book or a new project, I'll put up a page with about as much detailed information about it as I can. I'll try to make sure that there's at least some little value add if I can provide a look at, say, the sketch art for a cover that maybe you see the preliminary art and that's a little something you wouldn't get somewhere else, or maybe I put together a Spotify playlist of inspirational music that I was listening to while writing the book, and then I share that with a link off of the page about the book or about the story on my site. So I try to provide information and value added stuff like that.
Yeah,
um,
it was specifically when Vanguard was first starting the Star
oh
Trek
yeah.
Vanguard series, and you're one of the like I'm going to say this like it's fact, but I'm not 100% sure it's fact. But you're one of the few authors that's had a book come out with like blueprints of things that were happening in the story. John Jackson Miller just had
Maps, yeah.
maps, and yeah, yeah, which was one of the positive sides of a delay in printing that we had when there was a paper
Yeah,
shortage. But
it was on
um,
his advice that I ended up doing star charts for the front of Firewall.
fantastic. It's good that you guys are like trading notes on that kind of stuff, because the books are, it's all words, and adding those visual mediums to it like describes the story a little richer. But do you see any danger of how am I going to phrase this, like when you make art of a character to this in a book, some people are like, oh well, that's not exactly how I envisioned the character looking. Is
Sure.
there any concerns about that when you put those things into the stories?
Not really. I mean, in a case like Seven, we already know what she looks like. I'll describe her to a certain limited degree, just to sort of distinguish what version of her we're looking at. So, for instance, in Firewall, to sort of express the fact that she looks more like she did in Picard with longer hair, I will make a specific point of calling out that detail and then also explaining within the narrative why did she grow her hair out. It
Hmm.
wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was that as she started getting persecuted more on Earth and getting a lot more harassment for being part Borg or ex-Borg, she grew her hair out so that she could try to artfully conceal or hide some of her facial implants a little better, or at least hide them with a hood up, so that she wouldn't be quite as visible, so that she wouldn't be quite as obvious a target. So there was an in-story rationale for why she grew her hair out. But beyond that, for instance, some of the supporting characters, I described them a little bit. Like I describe, Keon Harper. You get the sense he's a white guy. He's older. He's gray-haired, white-bearded. He's in his 60s. He's getting up there. But so you get a sense. And I was picturing, Jeff Bridges as he looks in an FX series called The Old Man. And
Mm.
I'm picturing that incarnation of Jeff Bridges as Keon Harper. And then for Seven's love interest of Ellery Cade, I was picturing Jessica Henwick, who a lot of folks probably know from the Iron Man, not
Iron
Iron
Fist.
Fist series, Marvel series. She played Colleen Wing, and she was also, she was one of the X-wing pilots in Force Awakens. She's done lots of other cool stuff. She was in Game of Thrones. Uh,
Latest Matrix film.
right, latest Matrix film. She was Bugs, right? With the
Hmm.
blue hair. Love her. Love Colleen Wing. So I'm, and love Jessica Henwick. So I was picturing her as the love interest, but I left it vague enough. I mean, I sort of touched upon details like she's shorter than Seven. She's got dark hair, relatively fair skin, but I didn't get into too much more detail than that. So that if someone wants to, for instance, picture some other actress, if somebody other person works better for the reader, I didn't want to get too specific. I try to leave a certain amount of leeway. There are some authors who make a whole point of never actually physically describing the main character, just as sort of like a fun experiment. I never realized this before, but Richard Kadri did this in Sandman Slim. The character of Stark, if you read it, a lot of the scenes are written from Stark's POV, and he interacts with other people, but he never describes himself. And Kadri, as sort of omniscient narrator, when he goes into that mode, doesn't describe Stark either. Stark looks like whatever you, the reader, want him to look like. Whatever you think he looks like, that's Stark. And it's one of those things I didn't pick up on it until Kadri pointed it out online, and I suddenly realized that's brilliant.
Right. Yeah,
Is
I do
pretty good thought.
remember. Yeah, I do remember one book where I straight up I don't think I actually knew the gender of the character by the end of the book. It was
Right.
like at in like the last quarter, I was like, hold up. Like who are we actually like who's following or like who are we following here?
Yep.
And did I see that you have a Mastodon account as well?
Yes, I do. That's over at wandering dot shop.
Right, and that's a what do they call them? Like the tribes or something like that that's set up specifically for authors,
Instance.
right?
They refer to it as an instance.
Instance, yeah, right.
Yeah, and wandering.shop is very much geared toward the publishing industry, writers, editors, agents,
Hmm.
other people affiliated with writing or editing or publishing. And I think there are some other folks, but for the most part, Wandering Shop is also, and it's strongly geared toward genre publishing, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, YA, that sort of thing. So yeah, I found out about Wandering Shop back around the time that Twitter was beginning its meltdown, and a number of people who I know and respect were talking about that as an instance that they thought was a great place to hang out. And I was like, okay, uh, it has a very different vibe from, say, something like Blue Sky. Blue Sky, in a lot of ways, is almost like a better moderated version of what Twitter used to be. Whereas a Mastodon instance like wandering.shop, uh, it's an interesting space in that it's a place where you can have personal conversations. You can post an essay in pieces if you like. Some people use it for promotion. I've certainly promoted a few things over there, but it seems as if the culture of Mastodon and federated sites seems to discourage its use for crassly commercial self promotion. It seems that they rather would encourage personal interaction, meaningful one to one conversation. Um, it's seen as more of a social like a social interaction site where civility is definitely prized. It doesn't thrive on, say, the level of conflict or debate you'd find on X. And it even discourages, say, the level of blatant self promo you're going to see pretty steadily on Blue Sky. So when I just want to chat with somebody about this or that, I'll talk to them on wandering.shop. If I want to do promo, I'll do it on Blue Sky and Facebook. And if I want to just yell at fascists, I'll go to X.
Oh, so sad but so true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of constant like just commentary on how Star Trek has gone woke on X, and
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
went woke on
guys,
September 6th, 1966, and it
yeah,
just kept
exactly.
on me.
And you always have to wonder, like, am I actually talking to a person that's having like an honest conversation, or is this someone in a rage farm somewhere that's just stoking rage?
Yeah,
And
or it could be someone who's looking to build clicks. I mean, some
yeah.
of these people get money for generating a certain amount of engagement with a post, and the fastest way they find to drive engagement is to say something either blatantly wrong, which invites everybody in the world to swoop in and correct you and creates engagement, or create an argument about something where people will come in and just viciously attack each other from every direction, and once again create engagement. That's why I don't particularly care for X anymore. Blue Sky doesn't reward engagement. It's a completely different zeitgeist. There's no algorithm. There is no reward to engagement. Um, I kind of prefer the culture on Blue Sky, which is if you annoy me or in any way, if you harsh my Marie Kondo experience, if anything you do fails to bring me joy, you blocked.
Hmm.
Bye bye. I'm mellow. Uh, somebody decides to be a pain in my ass on Blue Sky, I just go, you are on the trebuchet and you are yeeted into the sun. Goodbye.
Yeah, so to completely shift the conversation, and I only just remember this when you actually said the full name of your website domain, because one version of your website actually lands with, "Are you looking for David Mack
That's
author?"
DavidMack.com.
Yeah, are you looking for a David Mack author or David Mack artist? And I think that is the classiest way of dealing with that, like, name situation. How did you guys come up with doing that?
It was a case of accidents piled upon accidents over a period of years. He and basically not a lot of people, some people know this, not everybody knows this. There is a very well known artist also named David Mack. His work is mostly for Marvel, but he's also done work for Image Comics and some of his own stuff. He's known as the creator of Kabuki. He's done a lot of work for Daredevil. Uh, and so we started tripping over each other back in the 90s.
Hmm.
And he was breaking in as an artist around the same time I was breaking in as a writer on TV. And then I was starting to write for comics around the same time he was starting to do cover work for comics. And the first inkling we had that something was gonna, this was gonna be an issue, was somewhere in the late 90s. I got sued by the IRS and I couldn't figure out why. And it turns out they sued me for not reporting his income. And what had
Oh boy.
happened was that somebody at DC, because he and I had both worked for DC Comics in the same fiscal year. I had co-written a script for the Batman Chronicles, and I guess he was doing cover work. And whoever it was in their accounting department didn't realize we were two different people. They didn't see the difference in middle initial, and they didn't realize we had different social security numbers.
Hmm.
So they conflated our file and they assumed we were the same person. And so they attached my social security number to their report of his income. So the IRS said, well, according to DC, you made all this money. You didn't report it or pay taxes on it. I'm like, I didn't make that money. And so I had to go back to DC, and DC found their error. Fortunately, DC fixed everything. Their people got on top of it. They filed amended paperwork. They handled it all and squared it all away. But that got me and the other David Mack talking. We said, all right, we clearly are going to have to do something about this to keep the wires from getting tangled. So we made sort of a gentleman's agreement that if I put my foot back into comic books, I was going to add my middle name. I'd be David Allen Mack. And if he got into writing for TV or writing novels, he'd add a middle initial. And we thought that this was a fair arrangement for the most part. I was already in the Writers Guild. I had David Mack tied up as a TV screen credit for writing. So that was sort of the arrangement we made. Over the years, he was a little quicker to jump on things like websites than I was. And he got his hands on davidmack.com and davidmack.net before I really thought about it. Like I got my own website for Infinity Dog, which is my corporate entity, in 1999 when I incorporated, because at the time I wanted to raise money to make an independent film, and I didn't see the point of having a website in my name. I wasn't writing as an author yet. I didn't understand the value of having a website with my name on it, so I didn't register it as early as I should have. And by the time I realized I wanted to, he'd already grabbed the two primary domains, .com, .net. I snagged .org, which, is for nonprofits. And considering, the numbers on my writing career in the first few years, it seemed more than apropos. Uh, but within a number of years, I managed, they brought out a new suffix .pro. I forget when that happened, probably around 2006, 2007. So I snagged up .pro on the basis that I was a member of the Writers Guild, which has professional qualities for entry, minimum standards you had to meet. And based on that, I was able to show that I qualified for a .pro site suffix. So I got that. And then strange things started happening. Like this was around the period when I began to figure out how websites worked. I'd gotten involved. I was working as a web editor for sci-fi.com, the website of the Sci-Fi Channel in the early 2000s. And I figured out how things like drop ad sites work. Like, if you let your registration run out, other people can snag it. So there's reasons why you have to take safeguards against stuff like this. And I thought, well, if the other David Mack quits the business, maybe has a mental breakdown, who knows what happens. I put in drop ad watches on davidmack.com and davidmack.net just in case they ever came available. I knew he didn't want to give them up, but I'm like, you never know. Put the watch on and then just leave it, and it'll probably never happen. Well, a couple of years later, bing, I get this notice. davidmack.com has dropped that basically whoever it was that he had hired to administer and manage his web domains for him dropped the ball, didn't set up auto payment on things like renewal of registration, didn't lock down the DNS, didn't take
Right.
any of the safeguards that they should have taken to protect a key web address for him. And so it fell into drop ad status, and it went through the 60-day period and it went to auction. And I went in and I was thinking to myself at first, I was like, I could just go and snag this at auction. It'll probably cost a bit of money, but I'll have it. But then I thought, all these years, he and I have had a good working relationship. We met a couple of times at Comic Cons, we shook hands. I wish him a happy birthday now and then. I thought, it would be really shitty of me to take advantage of his misfortune. I mean, yes, whoever worked for him made a mistake and yada, yada, yada. Technically, I've done nothing wrong. But you know what? This was his for a long time. And I said, if I just swoop in and take it, I'm going to feel like shit. This is not cool. There's
Right.
bad
And that's
karma.
gonna sour that relationship too,
It's going to
probably.
sour that relationship. It's bad karma and it's going to sour the relationship. So before I did it, I got in touch with him and I said, whoever works for you bungled this, and you need to know this is happening before the auction opens up in a few days. And he sort of went through and had, harsh words with his web manager about the screw up. And he said, "All right, so what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, here's the thing. I mean, I've wanted this real estate for a long time. You had it, you got to it first, but it's not your primary. You use davidmack.net as your primary address." And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "So how about this? I'm already in position to bid for this thing. I will go in, bid whatever it costs to get it. I'll get it for as little money as I can, but it will probably cost about X. You and I split that 50-50 right down the middle, and we take joint possession of the site. I'll redesign it, and davidmack.com will become a disambiguation page for people who don't know the difference between you and me. And it'll be one that highlights you with your picture on one side, me on the other, and it'll describe our relevant, most prominent works, so that people can say, "Oh, that's the guy I'm looking for," and we'll just share it. And from that point on, it'll point to you and it'll point to me, and someone will come to it, and whichever one of us they're looking for, they can go from there. And he said, "You know what? That sounds fair, equitable. I'm down. Let's do that." He said, that seems good to me. So we did that, and year or two went by, and I thought, this would never happen again, and lo and behold, whoever was managing his sites didn't learn their lesson the first time, and they lost control of his other address,
Oh,
lost control of davidmack.net. Now, this is a freaking disaster for him because davidmack.net is printed on his business cards. It's printed in the back of all the books he's published. It's like where you're supposed to go. And even though it redirects now to his Facebook page, or whatever, he was using this as his primary address. This is part of his brand identity. He can't lose this. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This went to drop ad? How the hell did that happen? So I got him on the phone. I said, "Did you know this just happened? Because this just happened." He goes, "I had no idea." I said, this is huge." I said, "All right, so here's the deal. I'm already in position. There's no point you going in and bidding if I'm already there bidding. All we'll do is drive the price up on each other for no good reason." He said, "So what do you want to do? Another disambiguation?" I said, "No, I'm going to go in. I'll pay what it takes to get it back. You pay me that and not a single cent more, and I give it back to you. And then I will lock it down for you, and I'll take over as your webmaster, and I'll make sure this shit never happens to you again."
right.
And he said, "That is more than fair." He says, "That is completely fine with me." So he fired his other webmaster. I got the site back. He compensated me for the cost of doing so. And I said, "Okay, where do you want me to point this address?" And he gave me the info. I said, "All right, it's pointed there." I said, "I'm going to lock this all down. It's going to cost this much per year. It's like $9. I'll cover it. Don't worry about it. I got your back." And I locked it all down so that it could never drop ad on him like that again. And I've maintained it ever since. I've been watching over it for like a decade. But like a week or two after this whole debacle was finished and we got it all locked down, doorbell rings, and this delivery I wasn't expecting shows up from the Harry and David catalog. They sell like the high end fruits and cheese and chocolate. The dude sent me and my wife pretty much everything in the catalog. He sent us everything: fruit, cheese, chocolates, the whole, just in this huge box packed with dry ice. And he was like, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He's like, "I could not have afforded to lose this address. Somebody else would have extorted me, tried to make me pay a ton of money to get it back, or would have forced it into disambiguation." And he's like, "You just gave it back." And I was like,
Mhm.
"It would have been bad karma to do anything else. That's your property, dude." And so to this day, because of stuff like that, uh, what could have been a rivalry is, in fact, we are good friends. I trust him. He trusts me. I watch over his addresses online and make sure they don't slip or get screwed up. He's a terrific guy. He did the artwork for a Wolverine novel that I wrote back in 2006 called Road of Bones. And he sold me the art, the original piece of art for that cover at friends and family prices. And so I took it to a gallery, had it professionally framed under UV protective glass and everything. And that hangs in my living room. Um, he's a terrific dude.
What a fantastic story. My
When
my
people say, "Do you know him?" I go, "Know him. I'm his webmaster."
Like my not my day job, but my primary side job is running websites. And the idea that someone would be able to just like to forget to renew a domain is flabbergasting.
It's
Like you
like,
got one job, guy.
how did you not lock down DNS change? How did
Right.
you not lock that?
Oh,
I
wow.
couldn't believe that. I could not believe the level of incompetence
Right.
that had to manifest for that to happen. And I explained to him, I'm like, dude, this should never have happened to you. Nobody in their right mind should have allowed this to happen. I will never let this happen to you again.
Right. Now, is that the only network stuff that you're doing, or do you do IT stuff routinely
That's the
for?
only stuff. I
Okay.
used to work, like I said, from around 2000 to 2008. I was the editor of sci-fi.com,
Okay.
which was the official website of the Sci-Fi Channel at that time, back before it was SIPI, back when they still
Hmm.
spelled it Sci-Fi. Before that, I had worked for a restaurant news website, and before that, for the magazine of a restaurant news called Nation's Restaurant News. Uh, so I made the transition around '97 from print to online, and then around 2000, I went from news to entertainment with Sci-Fi, and I was there for 8 years. I trained myself by hand out of a book to do things like code HTML, JavaScript, working with cold fusion engines, WordPress backend. Basically, just taught myself all this stuff out of a book, and then combined it with the fact that I knew how to write and I knew science fiction. And so while I was at Sci-Fi Channel, I was, maintaining websites for stuff like Farscape, Battlestar Galactica, The Invisible Man, The Chronicle. We were doing special event sites for movies and stuff like, The Triangle, Taken, um, Battlestar Galactica miniseries, just lots of fun stuff like that.
Okay. So yeah, that's a cool entry to it. Um, Man, I still just can't wrap my head around that. That's just that's crazy. So you had the Firewall come out. It was a fantastic book. Have you had any releases since then?
No, I mean,
Okay, and
I've had a short story come out.
right, you've had the short stories. And
But no book.
I heard through the grapevine that you got another book that's about to come out though.
Oh well,
Nothing.
not a whole book. I have an essay
Okay.
uh, that's in a book called Strange Novel Worlds.
Ooh,
It's
I'm
a
familiar with that one. Yeah.
book of academic essays published by McFarland. It's a small book and very expensive for its size. $55 is their asking price. It's academic publishing, textbooks, they're all overpriced.
That's actually cheap for some of those academic books.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so it's got an essay by me. I'm actually the lead off essay, in which my essay is essentially from the professional point of view. What does it mean to write professionally for licensed Star Trek fiction? What is the difference between canon, continuity, something being official, and quality? These four things are not synonyms in any way. They have no real interconnection. You can have any one without the other three, and
Hmm.
any combination. So I have a whole essay that talks about what is canon in relation to Star Trek. What does it mean? Who has to give a damn about it? How does it get applied? What is the work process like? And how did this all evolve? What does it do? What's its relationship to copyright? And what does all that mean in this context? So it sort of sets up an understanding that this is the milieu within which official Star Trek licensed fiction was created. It gives the reader that sort of foundation of, all right, this is how it works. This is the field on which all of this stuff was made, and it provides that as a context and a background. And then Una McCormick, I think, wrote a piece about the works of Vonda McIntyre. There's various other pieces by other authors about writers whose work interested them. And it's by no means an exhaustive tome. If it sells, I think that there could be a market for further volumes that dig into the work of other writers. There are plenty of writers who I think are deserving of a deep dive into the scope of their work, the themes of their work, just as Una did for Vonda. I think that somebody should do that for Michael Martin and Andy Mangels. They should look at there should be more essays about queer themes and queer representation in Star Trek fiction. I think that there's room for a deep dive into the works of Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore. There's definitely room for an exploration of the themes and through lines of the work of Keith Candido, of Michael Jan Friedman. These are all important names in Star Trek fiction whose work I think deserves deeper, more thoughtful analysis and criticism.
Is there anything about the partnership between the good example I have is Shatner and his co-writers on his
I
various
believe there
books?
actually is an essay that goes into the relationship, the working relationship between Shatner and the Garfield Reeve Stevenses.
Right. Yeah,
I
because
think
as
that
those
is
were coming
perfect.
out, I was a huge fan of those books as they were coming out, and then of course, when you go to the internet and bring your cherished things with you, you learn like why you shouldn't like this thing that you like so much. But I I can ignore
Somebody's
the
always
internet.
willing to dump, kick sand
Yeah,
on your ice cream cone. So
right. And I actually saw some very good reviews for this book on the Trek BBS area already, and I think that you swung by and saw that. If not you, then another author that's involved. But it's always fun to be on those review sites or those chat sites and have like the author swing by, just be like, "Oh, hey guys, how you doing?" and then go off.
yeah, you see that on Trek BBS. That's where a lot of us will sort of, swoop in, do our seagull pass, and
Right. So, uh, as I said at the top, the whole point of this is that we're going to shore leave, and this
yeah.
is my first one. And the parting question I've asked everyone else is, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to someone like me that's coming to one of these shows for the first time?
Well, let's see. Depending on when you're getting in, try to get in as early on the day on Friday as you can, just so
Hmm.
you have time to check in, get settled into your room, pick up your credentials. Uh, if you're coming here because you want to have interaction time with the writers, with the novelists, the most important day for that is Friday, and that's Friday night at 10 p.m. to midnight. Meet the pros. It's
Hmm.
the sort of the premier event from a literary perspective at the at Shore Leave. It's basically all the author guests. We get together in one big space, each of us with a table. Some of us sell books. Some of us are just there to sign or just there to chat. There's a bookseller in the vendor's room that is going to have copies of a lot of our recent work, including Strange Novel Worlds, my latest novel, Firewall, and some other titles. So you can buy copies of our books at the show, or you can bring copies of our books that you've already got. You can bring them from home by hook or by crook, by whatever means helps you get them there. I know most of us are happy to sign whatever fans bring. We don't insist you buy stuff at the show. But Friday night, that's the night because you got all of us for 2 hours. We're like a captive audience. We're like animals in cages. We can't leave. So you've got us. And that's where you go. And you can basically, we're happy to chat. We're there for 2 hours. So come on by. Don't just have us sign a book, with no inscription so you can eBay it. Stick around, ask some questions, have a chat, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm constantly thinking about like you mentioned the inscriptions with the names and all that jazz. And like, I personally don't care if my name's like written on the book or not, but I do worry that like I'm like, no, 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 don't put my name in it. I'm gonna eBay this. And uh
Yeah.
that's not the impression I want to get, because these books are gonna sit in my house for the next like 30 years until I'm no longer in the world, and someone from the next version of the Hoarders TV show comes in and says, wow, this guy really likes Star Trek, huh?
Yeah. It's just a running joke among authors that when someone tells you, "Oh no, no, don't personalize it," they go, "Right, right, to eBay." So,
Yeah, I've actually gotten a couple surprise autographs in books. The one most recently was oh, I am blanking on his name, but he does a bunch of Star Trek ships. He goes by Buck Admiral as his username everywhere.
okay.
Um, Tycho Starship Yards is the name of the book. and yeah, I'm blanking on his name, but he did this whole like big thing on the front page of it, and it's just a collection of like the models that he's built for
Nice.
Star Trek. He did the preliminary designs for the Wasp ship that was in Star Trek Picard. If you
Oh,
remember, they had like that head to head like confrontation. One of them had the
right.
engineering section that suck out like a wasp body. He did the
Mm,
preliminary version of that.
that's interesting.
Yeah, but it was a super cool book to get. Super cool to see the autograph in there, and he put my name on it, and I was like, you know what? I think that's what I want from now on, because then that you could tell that came from my collection, or
Yep.
at least a Adam out there. Out there, there's a few of us in this generation.
Hmm.
Um, so was there anything that I didn't ask you about or we didn't cover that you want to talk about before I let you go for the night?
I'll just make, for those who are coming to shore leave, if you are bringing books from home for me to sign, make sure it's one that I actually wrote and not the other David Mack.
Ah,
So if it's a comic book other than Star Trek, it's probably not me. If it's Kabuki, it's definitely not me. If it's Daredevil, it's definitely not me. In fact, I've never worked for Marvel. If it's Marvel, it ain't me.
well,
He's done a
did you
lot
say you
of.
did a Wolverine book?
I did a Wolverine novel. In
So is
that case,
that
I
not
will sign the
technically for
title page.
Marvel?
He'll sign the cover.
Okay.
But that book is out of print. Finding copies of that book is almost impossible. But if you find one, I'll be happy to sign it. However, if you bring me something of his, what I will probably do is I'll find the title page and I will scribble in, I did not write this, and then I'll sign that. Of course, he has a standing, we have a standing agreement. He'll do the same thing. If somebody insists on bringing him Star Trek books or some of my original novels, we don't like to embarrass the fans face to face because it makes
Right,
a bad experience. Fans may not always remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So if
right.
you have to embarrass them in the moment, we go, okay, and you go and you scribble it. And, I didn't write this. And then here you go, enjoy. By the time they get it home and realize that they've made a terrible mistake, at least you didn't do it to them in person.
Yeah, that's a good way to handle the situation. And I got to say, you guys have a very unique situation there with the names and the crossing of the industries. It's
It's
fantastic
just
to hear how you handled it.
it's just one of those things where you can either become bitter rivals and make each other's lives hell, or you can laugh at the absurdity of it and try to work together to make it a better experience for everybody. And we chose the latter.
All right, sir. I am going to let you go, and thank you very much for talking to me on such a short notice.
Thank
And
you
I'll
for
see
fitting
you
me in.
in just a few days.
I'll see you this coming weekend.
All right. Have a good night.